were silent but never absent. Born April 11, 1963, in the sun-soaked island of Barbados, June and Jennifer Gibbons seemed like any other twins, until they weren't. Their story would stretch across decades, confound professionals, and leave behind a mystery as haunting as it is heartbreaking. The Gibbons family relocated to Haverford, West Wales, when the girls were still toddlers. They were the only black children in their neighborhood and at their school, a difference that made them immediate targets for cruel and persistent bullying. Ostracized by their peers and misunderstood by adults, June and Jennifer began to pull away from the world and toward each other. Their bond became their refuge. It started with long silences around others, until they stopped speaking entirely to anyone but themselves. When they did speak, it was in a language no one else understood, a private, fast-paced dialect rooted in Bahan Creole and twisted into something indecipherable. Teachers and speech therapists tried to intervene, but the girls only grew more reclusive. Observers noticed something else, something unnerving. They didn't just act like twins. They acted like one person, split into two bodies. Every movement was mirrored, every meal eaten in unison. When one twin would attempt to do something alone, the other would sabotage it, deliberately or subconsciously, almost as if the act of separation posed a mortal threat. Their silence wasn't passive, it was pointed, deliberate. They would sit motionless in classrooms, refusing to respond even when directly addressed. They rarely blinked. They never made eye contact. One teacher described them as dolls with no batteries. Another simply called them haunting. At home, they created sprawling fantasy worlds. They wrote stories, dozens of them, full of twisted characters, violence, and betrayal. In one story, a doctor poisons his son's dog to watch him suffer. In another, children commit murder to escape the boredom of their lives. The stories were dark, yes, but more importantly, they revealed what the twins never said aloud, a yearning for freedom and a festering resentment under the surface of their bond. By their teenage years, their relationship had become toxic. Each twin seemed to need the other to exist, but also wished the other would disappear. Their diaries, discovered later, revealed thoughts of rage, domination, obsession, and self-harm. Jennifer wrote, "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes." June confessed, "One of us is plotting to kill the other." But they never did. Instead, they began acting out in the real world. In the early 1980s, the twins committed a string of petty crimes. They vandalized property, shoplifted, and set fires. Sometimes just for the thrill, sometimes to burn down things that reminded them of their isolation. Eventually, they were caught trying to burn down a tractor store. The court didn't know what to do with them. They were diagnosed with personality disorders and deemed a danger to society, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't. In 1982, at just 19 years old, June and Jennifer Gibbons were sentenced to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility notorious for housing Britain's most violent and disturbed criminals. They would spend the next 11 years locked inside its walls. Broadmoor Hospital was not a place for quiet reflection. It was built for Britain's most dangerous criminals, murderers, psychopaths, and the severely mentally ill. For June and Jennifer, whose crimes had never physically harmed anyone, it was a brutal overcorrection. But their silence scared people. Their bond frightened judges. So Broadmoor became their cage. The twins were placed in separate cells on opposite ends of the hospital. This was intentional, an attempt to force independence, to break the dependency. But it backfired. Without the other, they each descended into near catatonia. Nurses would later describe them as lifeless when apart. Together, they were strange. Apart, they were dead weight. When allowed to see each other again, they clung together even tighter. Their relationship, already obsessive, mutated under pressure. Their diaries from Broadmoor revealed deep turmoil, love, hatred, and an almost mythic sense of destiny. They believed one of them had to die for the other to be free, and slowly they began to prepare for that. Jennifer wrote about feeling controlled, almost possessed by her sister. "She's the shadow," she said. "I'm the real person." June at times agreed. Other times she claimed Jennifer was the one in control, pulling her mind like a puppet. Their identities blurred. Their individuality eroded. They lived like twin moons orbiting each other, and nothing else. Over the years, they showed signs of improvement. They became more cooperative with staff. Their writing became more introspective. But one thing never changed: the pact. They had spoken about it for years, that one of them would die so the other could live a normal life. At first it sounded poetic, even symbolic, but in time it became chillingly literal. In 1993, after 11 years in Broadmoor, the twins were approved for transfer to a lower security facility. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but Jennifer told nurses, plainly, "I'm going to die." She wasn't sick. She hadn't been harmed. There was no sign of medical trauma, but she was certain. On the day of the transfer, while riding in the van with June, Jennifer suddenly slumped over. Her eyes rolled back. She lost consciousness. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. At just 29 years old, Jennifer Gibbons was pronounced dead of acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart. No drugs, no toxins, no warning signs. Her heart had simply stopped. To this day, her death remains unexplained. Jennifer's death left the medical community stunned. Jennifer died suddenly from acute myocarditis, a rare heart condition that can be fatal but often isn't. The cause of her death remains somewhat unexplained, adding to the mystery surrounding the silent twins. Fulfilling the pact she and her sister had spoken of so many times. What happened next was even more bizarre. June began to speak, not just in fragments or whispers, but in full, articulate conversations. She engaged with doctors, nurses, and eventually journalists. The girl who once moved through life like a shadow now stood in the light. It was as if Jennifer's death had released her from something or someone. In interviews, June spoke about the day Jennifer died. She claimed that her sister had been acting strange for a few days beforehand, slurring her words, seeming detached. But more importantly, she said that Jennifer had made it clear she was going to die, not out of fear, not out of illness, out of necessity. Jennifer had said it was time. In a conversation with journalist Marjorie Wallace, who followed their case closely, June confirmed what many had suspected. The twins had made a deal, a psychic contract. One would give up her life so the other could live. Jennifer had decided it would be her, and June had accepted it. After Jennifer's funeral, June was transferred to the lower security facility they had both been scheduled to enter. She stayed there for only a year before being released, and remarkably, she stayed free. She went on to live a quiet, anonymous life, close to her family, far from the headlines. She never returned to that private language. She never wrote dark stories again. She moved on. But the questions didn't. How could two people become so enmeshed that the death of one unlocks the life of the other? Was it psychological dependency? A case of shared psychosis? Or was it something else? Something we still don't have language for. Over the years, the story of the silent twins has become a cultural myth, referenced in books, documentaries, even fictionalized in films. But underneath the headlines and mystery is something much sadder. Two girls rejected by the world, who clung to each other so tightly that they couldn't breathe. Two minds folded into one and then ripped apart. The tragedy of June and Jennifer Gibbons isn't just that one of them died. It's that neither of them ever really got to live. Unlike many stories we cover, this one ends with a glimmer of hope. June Gibbons was eventually released, and by all accounts, she's doing well, finally living the quiet, independent life she and her sister always dreamed of. This has been Abstract Pulse. Thank you for watching. And if you'd like to see more stories that slip between the cracks of silence and shadow, consider subscribing.